So, something that you'll need throughout business in every unit is your analytical tools. So, you need to be able to select important information about the business that you are focusing on in the assignment or exam that you have. And then you need to interpret that information to draw those conclusions about the implications of repositioning strategies in this case. So, in other units, you'll be focusing on other things with that interpretation aspect. And in this case, though, you're looking at the implications of repositioning strategies. So, this is what the strategy is, and what does it mean? What will result um, following that strategy's execution? So these are the analytical tools that you may have already learnt, or you may learn in the coming months, depending on where you're at. Now, keep in mind that you're not necessarily going to be assessed on all of these, because usually each piece of assessment is going to include two, sometimes even just one. You'll notice in each section here we've got three though, and so there's never really enough room in any of your assessment pieces to assess you on all three. So depending on the exam writers for the external exam, they will choose two for you to be assessed on, and equally your school teachers who write your internal pieces of assessment will choose ones that you need to do, or you'll have the ability to choose them yourself, depending on the way that they've written your piece of assessment. So, depending on where you're at in your business journey, you may be up to Unit 4, Topic 1, which is what we're covering today. If you haven't gotten to that point yet, then you'll be on Unit 3, Topic 2. So, of course, we can see in each of these sections, we've got the SWOT analysis. So hopefully you're pretty familiar with that already. But if you're not confident with it, then we are going to go through it today. And then steeple analysis, that's something that I mentioned earlier with a strategy to remember your macro environmental factors is using that steeple acronym. Socio-economic, technological, environmental, economic, political, legal, and ethical. And then Porter's 5 forces. This will be something that's new in this unit because it hasn't popped up before. So let's have a look at some of these in greater depth. So the SWOT analysis. This is about looking at two areas of the business. So the internal area where you're looking at strengths and weaknesses. So what does the business do well, and what advantages does it have over competitors? And then on the other hand, what does it lack or do poorly, and what disadvantages does the business have compared to competitors? And then you're looking at the external opportunities and threats. So is there increasing demand for products or services offered by the business or not offered by the business? So the business could expand into that area to make use of that increased demand. Do expansion opportunities exist? And can the business invest in new technologies? That's something that we see all the time, things like artificial intelligence and all of those technologies that are emerging along with that. They are opportunities that businesses can take advantage of to improve efficiency, improve their offerings for customers and the experience that customers have. And threats, you're always thinking about competitors here. So what competitors does the business have? What are they doing? Where are we positioned as opposed to them? But then in addition to competitors, also just those macro environmental factors. So what changes in the business environment could negatively impact the business. And again, looking at that steeple analysis acronym, those factors are what you would be considering there. So maybe a new law has been brought in and that could negatively impact the business. Maybe a new technology has been released and that could negatively impact the business if it doesn't take advantage of it, or perhaps a technology can take away jobs and that may impact a business, for example. Also, if you think of the environment as well, which is a big one, there are lots of environmental things that could and do impact businesses. So needing to respond to people increasingly being aware of the environment and our impact on it. If a business like a mining company, for example, has a negative impact on the environment, then they may need to think about how that's going to affect them moving forward. Now let's have a look at the steeple analysis. This is building on that SWOT analysis because usually it allows us to go into more depth and pick apart things into these different categories. So this is about external environmental forces that influence a business, and we're able to analyze that using this template. So here we've got examples for each of the different categories to get you thinking. So in the socio-cultural strategy section, this is all about people and their values and the way that things are working in society in that socio-cultural space. So Walida is a business that creates different products like creams and things like that. So it created a niche market. So a niche market is that small segment of a market that not many others or no others have taken advantage of, and it's attracting consumers who prefer those natural products that are environmentally friendly. And here we can easily see as well that crossover between these. So yes, that is about that people and their values value those natural products and things like that. But we've got a crossover there very clearly with the environmental section as well, because of that appealing to those environmentally friendly values that people have. Technological, so Pokemon Go uses augmented reality. That is a technology that the business is taking advantage of. Economic, so Dr. Bronner's another sort of environmentally sustainable kind of business that creates things like soaps and creams and things like that. So it has a strategy where it limits its executives' salaries to 5 times that of the lowest paid employees. So sometimes we hear about businesses who pay their top executives millions and millions of dollars, and then you hear about them paying people who are low down in the business hierarchy, not even adequate wages according to those award rates. So this is that strategy that the business is using that's economic to make sure that it's a fair system for the way people are paid. And again, that has a bit of crossover with other sections as well. We can think that that goes into that socio-cultural aspect because it's looking at values and people and things like that. It's also legal and ethical too, because it's important to meet those award wages for employees. and ethically, people want to see businesses, like we spoke about earlier, treating people correctly with wages and with working conditions and all of those factors. Environmental, the Very Good Bra, which is a sustainable kind of organization that makes bras that are completely sort of without wasteful materials. It has that offering of compostable bras, so you're not going to throw it out and it goes into landfill and contributes to environmental problems. So that's where that fits into that environmental space. Political. So Coca-Cola decreased its bottle size and increased prices because of the UK government's sugar tax a few years ago now. So that is an example of how those external environmental forces, in this case the political decisions of the government, are impacting the business and the way that they operate. So Coca-Cola changed the way it's operated because of that political environment. In the legal section, laws prohibiting advertising and age limits for purchasing cigarettes. So this was a long while ago now where we had that change where those big tobacco companies were no longer allowed to have fancy packaging that were attracting people to the products. Now we see warnings on our packaging for cigarettes to try and get people to not take up smoking. Ethical, lastly, so pay rates for food delivery drivers. That is something that we hear about quite often, where people in those sorts of roles don't have those fair wages and don't have rights. So we hear about people who have accidents because they're on a bike or a scooter delivering goods to people, delivering food and that kind of thing. But then they don't have the right kind of payment and the right rights within the business to make that an ethical kind of business. So in your steeple analysis, you would always be looking at one business and thinking about the strategies that it has and the external environmental forces that influence it. So something to keep in mind is that things, as I mentioned earlier, do cross over. So that's where it's best to only put something in once, because if you're in an assignment situation, then you've got a word count to think about. If you're in an exam situation, then you've got a time limit to think about. You don't want to spend time writing things in multiple sections just because they apply to multiple sections. So choose one section, try and choose the one that you think it's most relevant to, and if you can't make that decision, then just choose one. And just put it in that one category. And also keep in mind that sometimes not every category is going to have something relevant. There are lots of situations where there are no things that you can think about for certain categories. Oftentimes you're given stimulus that is really focused around something specific, and that may, for example, be a technological kind of thing, and maybe that has no relation to politics or ethics at all, for example. So your Porter's five forces analysis. This is something that may be new to you, depending on where you're up to in your studies. So this is an analysis tool that can be used by post-mature businesses to get a better understanding of the competitive industry that they're in, and it can allow them to reposition more effectively. So this is part of the sort of research and the strategic planning that they're doing in order to make sure their repositioning is a success. So it involves 2 bargaining powers and 3 threats. So your bargaining powers are your supplier power and your buyer power, and your threats are competitive rivalry, threat of substitution, and threat of entry. So, of course, most of these are straightforward based on the names. Suppliers, it's about how powerful the suppliers are in that relationship. The buyers, that's referring to consumers. Competitive rivalry is that business to business rivalry. Threat of substitution is the threat of customers going between businesses, and the threat of entry is a new business coming into the mix to create a more saturated competitive situation in the business environment. So supplier power, we can think about something like, for example, all of the supermarkets that rely on the suppliers to make sure that they've got all of the products that people want. So the capacity of those suppliers to influence a business's pricing by raising the costs of the goods that they provide. So factoring into that is how many suppliers there are. So if a supermarket, for example, is going to have probably quite a number of suppliers, if your business as the supplier increases its prices a lot, then that supermarket may have that ability to go to a different supplier. And that would mean that they have the power and the supplier has low supplier power. On the other hand, if a business is really niche, it offers something that other businesses want, but no one else provides, then it's going to have far more supplier power because the other businesses don't have any other options. They can't choose to go elsewhere. And so they're at the mercy of that business and the way that it chooses to price its goods. Buyer power is the level of influence of the consumers. So that can also be about prices, and it has that interrelationship with the threat of substitution, where you've got the idea of customers being able to substitute one business for another. So going between different supermarkets, for example. Competitive rivalry, of course, is about that business to business rivalry, the tactics that each business uses to try and get that competitive advantage in the market, and the threat of entry. So again, if we think of this supermarket angle, we've got the idea that new supermarkets could be coming in from overseas. And so years ago, back when Aldi came into the mix, that was relating to that threat of entry. So here are some questions that you can be asking for each of these different categories. So for supplier power, how dependent is the business on suppliers? How many alternative suppliers are available? How affordable are those alternative suppliers? And how easy is it to transfer between suppliers? So that's something to really keep in mind and not forget when you're thinking about this, because yes, maybe the business does have lots of other options of suppliers. Maybe they are far more affordable and would be far better, but perhaps it would have some kind of contract with its current supplier that would make transitioning to that new supplier really complicated. So that factors into that supplier power as well. Buyer power, that's how many customers are affiliated with the business, how many customers exist in the overall market. So there's going to be some people who go to Woolies, some people who go to Coles, some people who go to Aldi. So the first is about people who are affiliated with one of those businesses, and the second is about the overall market, all of the people who buy food from supermarkets. How sensitive are customers to pricing changes? That's a big one that we're seeing with the cost of living. And so buyer power would mean if customers have the ability to influence the way that businesses are pricing their goods. So they could be boycotting the business and trying to get them to reduce prices that way. They could be taking legal action and things like that. And then how easily can those customers switch to competitors? Again, this factors into the threat of substitution as well. That's the basis of that one. So competitive rivalry, how many competitors exist? You can have a duopoly, for example, where you've only got two big businesses that dominate in the market. For example, Qantas and Virgin. How dominant is the business in the market? And what tactics are those rivals employing to get that competitive advantage? Threat of substitution, how many substitutes exist? How can the business retain its customers? And how does the business compare to those potential substitutes? And it can be in terms of affordability, but it can be in terms of other things as well. Customer satisfaction, its reputation for customer service and being ethical, and all of those other things that go into our decision making when it comes to choosing one business over another, or choosing to leave one business for another. And then threat of entry. What are the capital and legal requirements of entering the industry? So sometimes, particularly in Australia, we've got lots of rules around businesses coming in from overseas, for example. And so if those requirements are really stringent and time consuming and expensive, then that's going to reduce that threat of entry, because the threat of those businesses coming in is less as a result of the difficulty that they would face in coming in to the Australian market. What is the level of saturation in the market? So if the business environment is already really saturated, then it's going to be less likely that other competitors are going to enter the market, because they're not going to be able to be financially viable, because they're not going to have enough of a customer base to sustain them. How profitable is the industry? And what are the impediments that may curb the emergence of new competitors? So again, that idea of all of the requirements that they may face to come into the industry, the different cost factors, and yes, particularly in Australia, we do have lots of rules around licensing and things like that. So there have been businesses from overseas in that supermarket sector that have wanted to come into Australia and haven't, because of those restrictions, and also the market domination of those existing competitors.